Jason and Rachel Bowman.
This is episode
47.
Thank you.
And it's good to be back with you guys.
Yes, it's so good. So tonight we wanted to talk to you. Last week, or the first week of November, the first full week of November was Vocations Awareness Week. And we really wanted to talk to you guys about vocations, and particularly how it applies to us. Obviously, we can't really give too much credence to the vocations. We can't give much of our knowledge, really, to the vocations, to the priesthood, or to religious life, because we have not experienced that ourselves.
Right.
If you have a lot to explain.
There are some things we can say about it.
We could say about it, but we don't have firsthand knowledge of those
Exactly.
things, correct?
Very true.
So tonight we really wanted to have like a 3-part series that begins tonight about vocations, and particularly for us, marriage for this first one, and then one for parenting, and then another on the permanent diaconate.
Yeah, which has been the latest development, if you will, in our walk with the Lord, and what we perceive as what He's calling us to now.
Yeah.
So it's been a beautiful journey, and but it all, of course, starts with our first vocation to marriage. And so we wanted to begin with talking about the fact that we feel pretty convicted that the reason that our marriage has, in our opinion, I think done pretty well, is the fact that we had, when you say like we had an encounter with Christ before we met each other.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
So we've talked before too about that's our first vocation. Like if you really had to say, what is your very first vocation? Your first vocation after baptism is a vocation to holiness.
Right.
And so we are all then called to be saints.
Yeah. That's what the church refers to as the universal call to holiness. And of course,
so within that,
yeah,
I mean, if you're going to live out your vocation and continue to live out in it becoming, because that's another thing. I think we have kind of like an incorrect notion of vocations that once you discover that vocation, that's it. Like you've kind of discovered your vocation, that's who you are. But I think that it's one of those things that's always becoming. Like you're always becoming
right.
who you're meant to be.
It's a dynamic thing. I think we imagine it to be like, okay, now I'm married, so everything is right, and my mission. But it's only the beginning, right?
Right. So it would be only right that if within that first initial vocation of the universal call to holiness, that you would then live in the fullness of that by having an encounter with Christ prior to discovering any other vocation for yourself.
Right.
It would be also just the correct posture for your life to be obviously in pursuit of Him. Because if you're trying to get an answer from Him about what your vocation may be or what His will for you is, and its specificity, wow, I can't talk, of marriage or celibate life or religious life or consecrated life.
Right.
Then you would have to practice hearing Him, and it would be really difficult to hear someone that you don't know.
Right. It's also hard to give yourself completely to another person in a permanent way when you haven't experienced a love that is permanent first.
Right.
Right? Because, I mean, as created and finite beings, we are contingent, we are dependent by nature. And so there is therefore kind of a lacking in us, in a sense, like we are dependent. So we have desires, we have longings, we have needs. And those particular needs stem from the fact that we were created to know God and to love Him and to live our whole life, with Him now and forever. And so He has to be the one who first shows us that
right.
That unending love, which actually is first presented to us should be by our parents, which is kind of a beautiful way that God has created us not to lord over us or he loves us so much that he raises us up to the point where we are co-creators with him,
Right.
and we are in his image and likeness. We show our children, his love.
So
And
when you were a kid, or a teenager, did you imagine yourself that you would be married? Or was that like without a question for you?
yeah, I mean, I would like to say that, that the concept of vocation was laid out for me specifically, but it really wasn't. I mean, of course, I grew up in Catholicism, so I mean, I saw priests, but that notion really never struck me. So I would say that I think by default, yeah, I always imagine myself married. Unfortunately, in the secular society that we live in, the question is more like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which
Right.
is a whole nother talk. We could talk about how disordered that whole thought is, but yeah, I think I would always say that I assumed that I would be married, although I didn't feel like a particular desire for being a husband or a father. I don't think at a young age. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was really interesting the other day. I've kind of started watching, not watching on a regular basis, but I watched the other day. Um, what's her name? Jada Pinkett Smith. And I'm sorry, but she has this thing now. It's called the Red Table Talk.
Uh huh.
And she has a red table in her house that she sets up, and she has conversations with people. It's supposed to be very vulnerable conversations.
Right.
I'm not particularly interested in that, but she had Will Smith come on,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a part of my childhood.
Sure.
So I was very interested in hearing their conversation. And a lot of it was really good. There was some of it that wasn't obviously um, what we espouse,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the things that he said that was really telling. Jada Pinkett Smith's mom asked him, "Did you think you were going to get married?" And he said, "As a very young child, I always imagined that I would be married. Like I wanted a wife and I wanted children and I
Right.
wanted a home with them."
Right.
Um, and I think for me, I mean, I grew up Protestant, so the talk of vocations really there wasn't any talk, you
Right.
know.
Right.
So I think I'd imagined myself as being married.
Sure.
But I definitely went through a period in college where I was like, probably never going to get married, um, just for various reasons. But
Right.
yeah, but I remember meeting you for the first time, and I was kind of like, okay,
Right. Well, it definitely wasn't until when I think for me it was like I was striving after something I didn't know what I needed, and it wasn't until like I truly had that encounter with Christ, and that I became free enough to like be okay with who I am in Him,
right,
to like find my identity in the love that He has for me. And that's so fulfilling, when you become when you share in His sonship with the Father, and you realize that is actually what your heart has been longing for. I think you had that at a much earlier point,
yeah,
at least at maybe a more basic level, or if you'd
yeah. I
say,
remember
but
going to a youth group night. A friend of mine had invited me. It was Church of God, and so she had invited me over because there was a guy that she liked or something.
right,
So we go in, and I remember sitting in the back, and it wasn't like I had not been exposed to it. My parents, I was adopted from the Philippines by missionaries, so I had grown up with some sort of Christian faith.
right,
Um, and then I remember being there, and these teenagers just loved the Lord, you know.
right,
Um, and there, of course, it was very, very Pentecostal, so everybody's down by the altar, and and I was struck not by, I don't think it even was the emotionality of it all, but I think I just looked at them and thought, I want to love like that, or I want
you
to
want to
feel that
be
way.